Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining today's presentation on the Desert Conservation Program, also known as DCP. My name is Olivia Burns. I am an environmental specialist for Clark County's Office of Sustainability. Joining us today for the All-In Sustainability Leaders presentation series is Kimberly Jenkins, a principal environmental specialist within the Desert Conservation Program. Today's presentation will focus on the program's efforts and plans to protect our deserts. Quickly, before Kimberly begins her presentation, I will go over a few steps to enhance your presentation experience. There are multiple ways we could use public input. Viewers may call in to hear audio by dialing the 855 number. You may also leave voicemail comments on that 855 number. This top right image shows where you click if you want to translate the entire meeting page and/or the live audio into another language. Select the language from the Translate drop-down menu. Another way to interact is by putting comments and questions in the chat box next to the presentation live stream. If you think of a question during the presentation, please put them in there and we will review them at the end. This presentation is also being recorded and will be available on this webpage you are viewing on right now and on the Sustain Clark County YouTube channel. Lastly, if you have any difficulties viewing or hearing the presentation at any time, please refresh the meeting page. Now I will happily pass it over to Kimberly from DCP. Thank you.
Hello. I will. My presentation. All right, just a quick check. Is that up and visible?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Kimberly Jenkins, and I'm a principal environmental specialist with the Desert Conservation Program. Today, I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the Endangered Species Act and the Desert Conservation Program and what Clark County is doing to assist with species recovery in Southern Nevada. We'll begin with a little background first. So what is the Desert Conservation Program? We are a division within the Clark County Department of Environment and Sustainability that has the responsibility for overseeing compliance, regional compliance with the Federal Endangered Species Act, which means it is our job to conserve species and habitat. We do this by implementing actions described in the Clark County Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan and the associated Section 10 Incidental Take Permit to ensure survivability of imperiled species. So what does this really mean? We'll take a closer look at the Endangered Species Act first. Since you've all signed up to participate in the All in Clark County initiative, you probably already recognize that species have value. Each species is part of a wider natural environment that can provide food, shelter, water, other functions for both wildlife and people. The federal government also recognized the inherent value in species, and in 1973, the Endangered Species Act was passed to protect and recover imperiled species and the habitats upon which they depend. Under the Act, species may be designated as either threatened or endangered. And once a species has been listed as threatened or endangered, it then becomes illegal for any person to commit take of a threatened or endangered species. Take is a legal term that is defined under the Endangered Species Act as to harm, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, trap, kill, capture, or collect, or to attempt to engage in any such activity. So it is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that is the federal agency that's ultimately responsible for overseeing compliance with the Act and for enforcing the Act at a national level. Specifically, it is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that determines which species should be listed as threatened or endangered. The service will then work to acquire land for the purpose of protecting it from development and to conserve listed species. Once a species becomes listed, the Endangered Species Act then makes it illegal to take, possess, sell, or transport listed species without a permit. So if anybody does these activities, then the service has the authority to impose both civil and criminal penalties for violations of the law. So conservation actions carried out in the United States under the Endangered Species Act have largely been very successful in preventing extinction for 99% of the species that have ever been listed as threatened or endangered. However, species loss on a global scale continues to increase due to environmental effects of human activities. Biologists estimate that since the early 1600s, which is about the time that European settlers were first arriving in the US, more than 500 of our country's plants and animals have become extinct, and many more species are expected to decline in numbers because of human activities. Today, the major factors contributing to species decline worldwide include widespread habitat loss, destruction and overexploitation of species for human uses, pollution, and the spread of invasive species, as well as the threat of climate change. These same factors are causing the same factors that are causing species declines worldwide are also impacting species and habitats here in southern Nevada. Currently, 14 species occurring in Clark County have been listed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as either threatened or endangered. But I want to spend the next few minutes talking about one of these species in particular, the desert tortoise, because the story of the desert tortoise is not only an interesting one, but it is one that has played a significant role in the community that we live in. So desert tortoises are a large land-dwelling tortoise species native to the Mojave Desert, which spans Southern California, Southern Nevada, Southwestern Utah, and Northwestern Arizona. Their typical habitat includes desert valleys below 5,000 feet elevation and where creosote bush grows. This also happens to be the same type of areas where people like to build their homes. So as the human population has expanded across the Mojave Desert, habitat loss and degradation has put increasing pressure on tortoise populations. In the 1980s, biologists began to raise the alarm when they noticed that desert tortoise populations were declining rapidly across their range. This was partly due to the presence of a disease known as upper respiratory tract disease, but was also largely a result of increasing pressure from development activities and increasing human populations across the West. So as a result of these rapid population declines, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service made the decision to emergency list the desert tortoise as an endangered species in 1989. The emergency listing of the desert tortoise was very problematic for development, especially here in southern Nevada, where most of the developable land is occupied by desert tortoises. So remember, when a species is listed under the Endangered Species Act, it is illegal to commit take of the species, which again is defined as harm, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, capture, or collect, or to attempt to engage in any such activity. So when the desert tortoise was emergency listed, it suddenly became illegal to develop in any area where tortoises may be impacted. This resulted in an immediate moratorium on all construction across the county. Development projects in the valley had to be abandoned. In some cases, construction workers were directed to walk off their job sites. This was very devastating for the local development community, and many projects were put on hold without any idea about when construction may be permitted to resume, and this was very threatening to the local economy. So following the emergency listing, some entities took action by suing the Fish and Wildlife Service in an attempt to overturn the listing decision. These efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. At the same time, however, Clark County decided to pursue a different approach to getting back to business. And this is when the Desert Conservation Program was formed. That solution that Clark County came up with turned out to be something called a Section 10 incidental take permit. So what is a Section 10 incidental take permit? Section 9 of the Endangered Species Act is the section that describes prohibition on committing take of a species that is listed as endangered or threatened. However, Section 10 of the Act provides a way for Fish and Wildlife Service to authorize take of listed species by non-federal entities when the take is incidental to otherwise lawful activity, meaning it is not the purpose of the activity. So this authorization process is what is referred to as the Section 10 incidental take permit. In order to receive a Section 10 incidental take permit, an application has to prepare what is called a habitat conservation plan. This is a required component of the application process, and the HCP is a document that describes the types of development activities that will be covered under a permit. It describes the species that are anticipated to be taken, and most importantly, it describes the measures that an applicant will take to avoid, minimize, and mitigate the take of listed species. So since the initial listing of the desert tortoise, Clark County has applied for and received 3 Section 10 incidental take permits. The first plan was approved in 1991 and covered only desert tortoise. This short-term plan was issued with the understanding that the county would immediately begin working on a longer-term plan. And that longer-term plan, the second plan, was approved in 1995, but it still only covered desert tortoise. And at this point in time, Clark County and the cities were starting to ask themselves, what would happen if another species were to suddenly become listed? Would we face the same emergency shutdown situation with construction and development activities? And so going down this line of questioning was what eventually led to the idea for the third and current version of the permit that we're currently implementing. So in 2001, the county submitted the Clark County Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan, or MSHCP for short. This plan covers a total of 78 species, including 4 that are currently listed under the Endangered Species Act. These include the federally threatened desert tortoise, of course, and the federally threatened yellow-billed cuckoo, the endangered southwestern willow flycatcher, and the endangered Mount Charleston blue butterfly. Oops, I went forward too much. So the reason for covering additional non-listed species is that regulatory assurances mean that if any of these species become listed during the term of the permit, then the county automatically receives permit coverage for these species. It also means that our program is actively working to conserve and recover these non-listed species, which reduces the risk that they'll ever become listed under the Endangered Species Act in the first place. So the Desert Conservation Program serves as the administrator of the MSHCP, and our role is to implement the MSHCP and the associated Section 10 incidental take permit on behalf of the permittees. The MSHCP permittees include all the incorporated cities within Clark County and the Nevada Department of Transportation. In short, this is a plan that provides a streamlined process for development in Clark County to comply with the Endangered Species Act. The MSHCP allows for development of up to 145,000 acres in Clark County, and it covers all non-federal land, including lands that may be sold through BLM disposal processes. It is a 30-year permit that went into effect in February of 2001, so therefore is set to expire in 2031. Developers can opt into the plan by paying a $550 per acre fee that is tied to the grading permit application process. This fee is then used by the Desert Conservation Program to implement the variety of conservation actions that are described in the MSHCP. So conservation actions carried out by the Desert Conservation Program are wide and varied. In the early days of our program's existence, we worked with federal agencies to set aside large areas in Clark County for the conservation of desert tortoise habitat. We also purchased millions of acres of grazing preferences from the Bureau of Land Management to remove cattle grazing across most of southern Nevada and improve habitats for covered species. Today, we actively work on managing several properties for their value as habitat for covered species. These include an 87,000 acre conservation easement south of Boulder City that is managed for desert tortoise habitat, and several properties along the Muddy and Virgin rivers that are managed for bird species like the threatened yellow-billed cuckoo and the endangered southwestern willow flycatcher. Reserve management activities include increased law enforcement on our properties. Our law enforcement officer here assists with educating the public about the rules and provides citations for unauthorized activities. We install and maintain fencing to protect habitats and restoration sites. And we conduct regular surveys and treatments of non-native invasive plant species across all the properties that we manage. We conduct regular habitat restoration work on our reserve properties that we manage, and in partnership with federal government, we conduct work on public lands as well. Here you can see crews that are removing tamarisk, which is a non-native species that lives along our riparian corridors, and crews replanting sites with native nursery-grown species. The Desert Conservation Program has also funded the installation of over 400 miles of desert tortoise-proof fencing on roads and highways in Clark County. We assist the Nevada Department of Transportation with conducting regular inspections and maintenance of this fencing to ensure that it stays in good condition and serves the function that it is meant to. Currently, we're in the middle of constructing an additional 5 miles of tortoise-proof fencing along the new Tule Springs Fossil Beds National Monument. We expect this to be complete later this year. For many years now, we have operated what we call the Wild Desert Tortoise Assistance Line, which is a free service that we offer to the development community to remove desert tortoises that are found on construction sites. Desert tortoises that are collected from these construction sites through the hotline service are taken to a temporary holding facility where they undergo a quarantine period and health assessments before ultimately being relocated to a new site that is not at risk of development. Translocated tortoises are then monitored for several years to collect data on health and mortality of translocated tortoises in comparison to resident tortoises. We also have a very robust public education and outreach program. Mojave Max is, of course, the star of our public education and outreach program. He helps us teach elementary school age children about tortoises, the Mojave Desert, and what they can do to protect natural areas. Through the Mojave Max Education Program, we directly reach about 4,500 students every year by giving assemblies and tortoise talks. We, sorry, my lights just went out. We also do a lot of community outreach as well. We host education tables at events throughout the year and are actively engaged with the OHV community to promote responsible desert recreation. So all of this only begins to scratch the surface of the work that we do in the Desert Conservation Program. Throughout the years, we've been involved in numerous research efforts to improve management of species and their habitat, such as looking at different ways to improve testing for and management of diseases in desert tortoises, looking at ways to improve nursery propagation of rare plants and to improve restoration outcomes, and research on predator relationships and control. We regularly monitor populations to determine their status and trends, and we engage with elected officials and other decision makers to enact laws and policies to conserve additional lands for the benefit of species in Clark County. So since the MSHCP was established in 2001, the Desert Conservation Program has obligated over $162 million in funding towards the implementation of conservation actions identified in the MSHCP. Funding is spread across categories, with our highest funded categories being research, inventory and monitoring projects, administration of the program, and restoration and rehabilitation. So if you would like to get involved in the work that the Desert Conservation Program does, sign up to join us for our Desert Cleanup event at the Boulder City Conservation Easement on September 30th. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube for the latest updates, news, and announcements about new campaigns and initiatives. That is my presentation. Thank you for your time today. And I guess we have time for questions now.
Great. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for sharing all your insight and expertise about the Desert Conservation Program. Now I will pull up some of the questions that the audience has. Okay, first question, I think you just covered it. with the cleanup event, but does DCP have any other volunteering opportunities?
So we're working on building capacity with our volunteer opportunities right now. So that's something that if you're interested in, you should definitely sign up to follow us on social media and keep an eye out for more information on that.
Okay. Thank you. Does this department inspect the land for an environmental assessment prior to construction and development?
No, our program does not, our permit does not require that individual parcels be inspected before development is complete.
And then the next question that we have is, how does DCP improve native plant populations throughout Clark County?
We do that in several different ways. First is by finding ways to protect and conserve habitat where those species occur in the first place. Another way is through a lot of ongoing research efforts that we have. So one of the projects that we're doing right now is looking at ways that we can improve propagation of rare plants within a nursery system so that we have stock for restoration efforts and population augmentation efforts. We've done some germination studies to kind of figure out what the factors are that improve or reduce germination rates from year to year. And then we also actively do a lot of non-native and invasive plant species treatment work across the properties that we manage to reduce competition with native species. And finally, of course, we do active restoration work as well.
Thank you. And then let me refresh to see if there's any more questions. And then it says, are there certain areas of Clark County that is protected? And if so, to what extent?
Yes, actually, Clark County has one of the highest percentages of protected land of any county out there. So almost, I think the last time we looked, it was about 68% of the land by area has some sort of conservation designation or another. So it's either designated as wilderness area, or it's a national conservation area, or it's a Bureau of Land Management area of critical environmental concern. So they all have varying levels of management activity, but the primary goal of all of those lands is, of course, conservation and protection of species and habitat. And so it's about 67, 68% of the land area right now. We're working on legislation that would see a lot more land entered into various conservation designations as well. That could see the conservation area within Clark County bumped up to as much as 70 or 75% of the total area.
Great, thank you. And then another question we have is, have you seen trends related to food and water supply for wildlife?
Yes, for sure. Within recent years, the last few years that we had drier than usual, that certainly affects germination rates for plant species across the Mojave Desert. So in years where we don't get as much rainfall, annual plant germination rates are highly suppressed, and that's what that's what desert tortoises rely on for food. It's what a lot of our other species also rely on. Yeah, so that is something that we've certainly seen in recent years with increasing effects from climate change as things continue to get drier. Although we've had a really great this year with more than usual rainfall. So hopefully the tortoises are able to rebound a bit this year from the last few years of drought.
Yeah, absolutely. And then a final question looks like is, what is your favorite Mojave desert animal?
Ooh, I kind of am a big fan of Gila monsters just because they're really cool. They're one of the only venomous reptiles in North America. They also look really cool, and they're surprisingly large if you ever are lucky enough to see one in person. So yeah, I'm going with the Gila monster.
Is there anywhere we're able to see them, like the Springs Preserve or?
I believe there's one at the Springs Preserve, although I'm not 100% sure. Gila monsters are incredibly cryptic and don't come up above ground very often. So if you ever get to see one in the wild, consider yourself extremely lucky. For those of us who have spent our whole career as biologists, traipsing all around the desert, most of us never get the opportunity to see one. In my 22-year career, I have seen one out in the wild. So,
Wow, there we go. So we'd be very lucky.
yep.
All right. Well, if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Since we have just a few minutes, I'll go over some of our other education engagement events that we have coming up. Okay, so in just a few weeks, we have the Clark County Air Quality virtual presentation. You can see my screen with the different events, Kimberly.
I think I'm still sharing. So let me stop.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, okay, so yeah, we have the air quality presentation on July 12th. So it's very similar to this. It's from 11 a.m. to 11:30. So you could come ask our air quality experts your questions and learn about how we monitor our air quality. UNLV has a climate action plan out right now, and they're asking our community for feedback from their plan. So if you filled out our surveys for the community plan past 2 years, then this one is very similar. So just offering UNLV our feedback and our input on different sustainability efforts that we would like to see them do. We are also touring the ARIA. If you are interested, you could visit with us. We have a tour with their sustainability manager to go over some of their eco-friendly hotel practices. If you're not able to make an in-person event, we also have a virtual presentation that will be with MGM to talk about their company-wide initiatives from all of their properties. And that is going to be Thursday, August 14th. So you could register just below the presentation screen you are viewing on right now. And then also we have multiple campaigns that you're able to participate in at any time. We have an education interest survey, so you could tell us what you're interested in learning about. So if you're interested in learning about desert conservation, then today's presentation was just for you. And then we also have some other initiatives and campaigns. So if you want to learn about energy awareness and conservation, you could participate and learn more about that, or how to stay cool here in Clark County by addressing urban heat islands. We have a county-wide battery recycling program. So if you are looking for some place to recycle your batteries, you could drop them off at a few public locations. So you could click here that says participate to find out what those public drop-off locations are. And you can stay updated with us at Sustain Clark County. And then of course, Mojave Max is social media and DCP as well. But there is no other questions for desert conservation. So I really appreciate everybody tuning in today and participating, and of course to Kimberly for coming on and sharing everything with us. So thank you.